Of all the Emperor's sons, none were closer to him than Horus. As the first Primarch to be rediscovered, Horus spent 30 years fighting alongside his father as the Great Crusade began its momentous journey across the stars. In those early days, with no other brothers yet found, the Emperor poured his knowledge and skill into his first son, teaching him not only the mechanics of war, but the subtleties of command and human nature. They developed a powerful bond, standing together on countless battlefields and spending long hours in conversation after the fighting was done. Their mutual loyalty was absolute, proven in the heat of combat, where each saved the other's life. During the siege of Rylus, the Emperor famously defended his son's unconscious body from all attackers after Horus was struck down by a plasma blast. Horus had the chance to repay this debt on the scrap world of Goro. There, during a brutal fight against a rising Orc empire, a massive Orc war chief managed to overpower the Emperor and began to choke the life from him. Seeing his father in peril, Horus charged through the battle, his rage giving him immense strength. He reached the Orc leader and tore the creature's arms from its sockets, freeing the Emperor. This event, like the one on Rylus, became a celebrated story throughout the expanding Imperium, a testament to the deep connection between its leader and his most favored son. Once the Emperor unified Terra and secured the solar system, the Great Crusade began to push outward with incredible speed. The primary goal was to reclaim the scattered worlds of humanity, worlds that had been lost and isolated since the Dark Age of technology. This vast undertaking was spearheaded by the legions of the Astartes, but they were not alone. The crusade was a colossal enterprise, supported by the immense manpower of the Imperial army, the zealous faith of the Adepta Sororitas, the technological might of the Mechanicum, and the towering war engines of the Titan legions. The ongoing search for lost human colonies was aided by the far-ranging explorer fleets of the Mechanicum and the independent merchant fleets of the rogue traders. Even as other Primarchs were discovered, Horus remained first among equals. His legion, the Lunar Wolves, developed a reputation for being the best of the best, a versatile and highly effective fighting force. They were known for their pride and their relentless drive to be the first to achieve victory, a reflection of their Primarch's own ambition. The Lunar Wolves were so renowned that their name often preceded them. Other Imperial forces, including different Astartes legions and regiments of the Imperial army, would request to serve alongside them just to witness their famed battle prowess. This reputation was earned through countless victories, culminating in the Ulanor Crusade, where Horus decisively crushed the largest Orc empire the galaxy had seen. It was after this triumph that the Emperor decided to return to Terra to focus on other crucial projects. He had complete trust in his first son's ability to lead. In a grand ceremony, he bestowed upon Horus the unique title of War Master, giving him supreme command over all Imperial military forces. This appointment placed Horus above his brothers, a decision that, while logical, caused friction among some of the other Primarchs. Despite this, Horus was a master of diplomacy and command. He understood the strengths and weaknesses not just of his own legion, but of every military asset at his disposal. He had a remarkable talent for bringing his brothers together, soothing egos and forging bonds to create a cohesive and unstoppable war machine. He made it a point to personally greet each of his lost brothers as they were found, and most of them came to respect and admire him for his experience, his charisma, and his unique closeness to the Emperor. Of the many conflicts during the Great Crusade, few could match the scale and importance of the war for the Ulanor system. This sector was the heart of a massive Orc empire, a sprawling green-skinned dominion ruled by the powerful war boss Urlak Urg. It was more than just a nuisance. The Ulanor Empire was a major strategic obstacle, a concentration of alien power that stood directly in the path of humanity's expansion. The threat was so significant that the Imperium gathered an immense force to crush it. By this point in the crusade, most of the Primarchs had been reunited with their legions, and for a campaign of this magnitude, their presence was essential. Alongside Horus and his Lunar Wolves, other legendary figures like Jagatai Khan of the White Scars and Robuti Gilliman of the Ultramarines brought their full might to bear. The strategy devised was a classic example of overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. While Gilliman and Khan led their legions in sweeping assaults against the outer worlds of the Ulanor system, their attacks were designed to be a grand diversion. The goal was to draw the bulk of Urg's Orc armies away from the capital world, Ulanor Prime, forcing them to react to multiple threats at once. With the enemy's attention divided, the main Imperial force, led personally by the Emperor and Horus, would execute a lightning-fast strike directly at the enemy's command center. This was Horus's preferred method of war, a decisive decapitation. He firmly believed that if you cut the head from the snake, the body would wither and die on its own. As the plan unfolded, the Emperor commanded the main ground assault on Urlak-Urg's fortress palace, supported by the immense firepower of the Titan legions. While this conventional attack pinned the defenders from the outside, Horus initiated the critical part of the plan. He and his elite inner circle of Terminators, the Justaerin, used teleportation technology to materialize deep inside the palace itself. They bypassed the outer defenses entirely, emerging into a storm of resistance. They fought their way through a tide of orcs, their progress a brutal grind through corridors thick with enemies until they reached the war boss's throne room. There, Urlak-Urg waited, surrounded by his personal guard of massive orc nobs, the biggest and toughest warriors of his empire. Without hesitation, Horus lunged forward, his lightning claws crackling with energy as he charged the orc leader. His Justaerin attempted to provide covering fire with their bolters, but the melee was so chaotic they feared hitting their Primarch. Instead, they charged in behind him, engaging the nobs in a desperate, close-quarters battle. The fight was savage, but Horus's skill and fury were unmatched. He drove his claws deep into Urlak-Urg, lifted the giant creature high into the air, and carried him to the palace balcony. With the orc defenders watching from below, Horus hurled their leader's broken body down amongst them. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the orcs. Seeing their mighty war boss slain, their morale shattered completely. The surviving nobs, with no single leader to command them, immediately began fighting amongst themselves, each one trying to assert dominance and become the new chief. Horus watched the orc army dissolve into infighting and knew the battle was won. When he returned to the throne room, he found a scene of carnage. All the orc nobs were dead, but the victory had come at a great cost. Of his entire elite squad, only one man was left standing. First Company Captain Ezekiel Abaddon, the formidable leader of the Justaerin and Horus's most trusted advisor. While Horus had secured the capital, Khan and Gilliman had achieved their own objectives on the outer worlds, leaving the rest of the campaign as a months-long mopping-up operation, hunting down the scattered remnants of the once great Orc Empire. The victory at Ulanor was the high-water mark of the Great Crusade, a triumph so complete that it would be immortalized in Imperial history. Horus, already a celebrated figure, was now elevated to the status of the Imperium's greatest living hero, second only to the Emperor himself. To ensure the memory of this achievement would endure, the Emperor commanded a celebration of unprecedented scale. Fleets of Mechanicus earth movers were dispatched to Ulanor Prime, where they scoured a vast plaza clear of the orc dead, creating an open space larger than many Terran cities. Upon this plain, a single magnificent pavilion was constructed from granite and dark marble shipped across the galaxy from Terra. The grand procession way leading to it was lit by massive torches burning with blue and white promethium fire, and flanked by poles bearing the skulls of defeated orc chieftains. The parade that followed was a display of the Imperium's full military might. Endless columns of Imperial army regiments marched in perfect formation, their ranks stretching to the horizon. Behind them, the colossal war machines of the Titan Legion stood as silent, steel sentinels, while overhead, the Aeronautica Imperialis conducted a flawless ceremonial flyover. The veterans of the Ulanor campaign were honored with a unique distinction, a black and gold stripe to be worn on their uniforms, an award of courage forged from the melted-down casings of bolter shells recovered from the battlefield. Following the mortal soldiers came the demigods of the Astartes. 14 legions were present, led by 9 Primarchs. Each of the Emperor's sons was now accompanied by his own elite bodyguard, a practice that had become common across the legions after they witnessed the effectiveness of Horus's Justarin. After the parades and speeches concluded, the Emperor made an announcement that stunned the assembled hosts. He began by lavishing praise upon Horus, celebrating his strategic genius and unwavering courage. But then, his tone shifted. He declared that his time at the head of the Great Crusade was over. He would be returning to Terra to begin a secret project, one he claimed was essential for the future of all humanity. In his stead, he appointed Horus to a new, unique position of command, bestowing upon him the title of War Master. From that moment on, Horus would have supreme authority over all the Imperium's fleets and armies. He was to be obeyed as if he were the Emperor himself. While the vast crowd of soldiers erupted in thunderous applause, the reaction among Horus's brothers was far more complicated. They felt pride in his recognition, but also a deep unease. Horus was no longer just the first among them. A formal hierarchy had been established, and they were now his subordinates. More painful still was the news of the Emperor's departure. To many of the Primarchs, it felt as though their father was abandoning them on the frontier, his work with them finished. In this moment of confusion, jealousy, and sorrow, dark influences in the galaxy found fertile ground, preying upon the complex emotions stirring within the hearts of the Emperor's sons. Following the ceremony, the Emperor suggested that Horus rename his legion from the Lunar Wolves to the Sons of Horus, a further honor to mark their central role in the victory. Horus initially refused, still sensitive to the growing rift between him and his brothers. However, as he felt their respect giving way to resentment, he reconsidered. After a long discussion with his close friend Sanguinius, he accepted the change. The Legion's iconography and armor colors were updated, and a new tradition began. In the heat of battle, his warriors would no longer cry out just for the Emperor. They would shout praises for the War Master. It is possible that this accumulation of power and adoration nurtured a nascent ambition within Horus, turning his mind into a receptive vessel for the corrupting ideas that would eventually lead to galactic civil war. The Emperor's most defining trait was his immense psychic power, and he was acutely aware of the warp's energies and those who could manipulate them. Certain psychers, such as the navigators who guided ships through the Immaterium and the astropaths who carried messages across the void, were indispensable to the Imperium. However, as the Great Crusade expanded, it encountered a growing number of unsanctioned magic users. The psychic gene was becoming more common in the human population, leading to instability. Entire worlds of sorcerers, long ago seduced and twisted by the Chaos gods, were discovered and had to be purged. This trend extended to the Space Marines themselves, where the number of warriors developing psychic abilities was on the rise. In many legions, these individuals were either suppressed or disciplined, sometimes with extreme prejudice. However, a few Primarchs, notably Magnus the Red, Sanguinius, and Jagatai Khan, saw the potential in these gifted soldiers. With the Emperor's initial blessing, they established the Librarius program, a structured system for training psychers to control their powers, wield them as weapons of war, and defend their minds against demonic influence. The legions that embraced this program saw their combat effectiveness increase significantly. This acceptance was far from universal. Magnus and his Legion of Thousand Sons, a brotherhood composed almost entirely of powerful psykers, attracted the most suspicion. The more conservative elements within the Imperium refused to fight alongside them, viewing their methods as unnatural and dangerous. Magnus was frequently and publicly accused of trafficking with dark powers. His most relentless critics were his own brothers, Leman-Russ, who viewed all sorcery as a dishonorable and treacherous shortcut to power, and Mortarion, whose hatred was born from his experiences fighting the psychic overlords of his homeworld, Barbarous. The ideological rift grew so severe that it threatened to fracture the Imperium. Alarmed by the accusations against Magnus, the escalating feuds between his sons, and the potential danger posed by the Librarius project, the Emperor knew he had to settle the matter permanently. Following the triumph at Ulanor, he convened a great council on the world of Nicaea, summoning all the Primarchs, representatives from their librarian orders, the leaders of the Martian Mechanicum, and his most trusted advisors. He presided over the gathering from a high throne, acting as the ultimate judge. The case against the use of psychic powers was presented by the Sisters of Silence, an order of warrior women who are psychic nulls. The presence of these untouchables was disquieting to normal humans, but it was agonizing for psykers and demons alike. They testified to the horrors wrought by sorcery, the ever-present risk of chaos corruption, and the monstrous entities that could be unintentionally summoned from the warp. They reminded the assembly of the dark deeds committed by sorcerers during the Age of Strife. Primarch Magnus the Red spoke for the defense. He argued passionately that knowledge itself could not be evil. Only the intent of the user determined its nature. The key, he insisted, was to master this knowledge, not to be mastered by it. He declared that his legion had their powers under absolute control, and that their studies were dedicated solely to the advancement of the Imperium. His powerful oration swayed many in the audience. He was supported by a delegation of 12 librarians from different legions. Their spokesman, Targutai Yesuge of the White Scars, compared psychic ability to athletic talent, a gift that required discipline and training to perfect. With proper control, he argued, the Imperium stood to gain a host of powerful and loyal warriors. After hearing all arguments, the Emperor revealed the Council's true purpose. It was not merely a debate, it was a formal trial of Magnus the Red. The Emperor was deeply disappointed in his son, for he had personally confided in Magnus about the true nature and immense dangers of the warp. Discovering that Magnus had ignored his warnings and delved into forbidden lore filled the Emperor with a cold fury. His final judgment was absolute. The Edict of Nicaea outlawed the Librarius program in every Astartes legion. All existing Librarius departments were to be disbanded, and gifted Space Marines were ordered to return to the line as regular battle brothers, forbidden from using their psychic abilities. To enforce ideological purity and adherence to the Imperial truth, the new role of chaplain was introduced into the Legion's command structures. Finally, the Emperor turned to his son. "If you touch the warp, Magnus," he warned, "I will come for you, and I will destroy you. Your legion's name will be struck from the records for all time." Magnus was shattered. The pursuit of knowledge was his life's purpose, and sorcery was the very soul of his legion. Heartbroken, he submitted to his father's decree, and the Council of Nicaea concluded. But its ruling was not universally obeyed. Leman-Russ, the loudest critic of sorcery, hypocritically retained his own psykers, claiming their powers were different, drawn from the spirit of his homeworld, Fenris, rather than the warp. The secretive Alpharius simply ignored the edict, and Magnus, driven by a sense of injustice and betrayal, continued his arcane studies in secret, delving deeper into the forbidden arts than ever before. The Emperor's return to Terra after the Ulanor triumph left a void at the head of the Great Crusade, one that his chosen son was meant to fill. Granting Horus the title of War Master may have seemed like the ultimate honor, but for Horus, it felt like a consolation prize for being left behind. As the first Primarch found, his bond with the Emperor was the deepest, and the separation hit him the hardest. A bitterness began to grow in his heart. The endless conquests started to feel pointless, as if his father no longer cared for his achievements. He grew paranoid, convinced his brothers were plotting against him out of jealousy, their respect for his authority eroding daily. The old rivalries between the Primarchs, once kept in check by the Emperor's presence, began to flare up openly, and Horus found he lacked his father's absolute authority to quell them. This failure wounded his immense pride. The final indignity came with the establishment of the Council of Terror, a body of mortal bureaucrats who began issuing directives in the Emperor's name. The idea that he, a Primarch and War Master, would have to take orders from ordinary humans was infuriating. He became consumed with resentment, seeing his father as the source of all his frustrations, a distant figure who had abandoned his sons and perhaps even set Horus up to fail. Slowly, Horus stopped trying to unite his brothers and instead began to gather those who would offer him unquestioning loyalty. This internal conflict was expertly exploited from the shadows. While on campaign, Horus's fleet made contact with the Interrex, a sophisticated human civilization with technology that rivaled the Imperium's. The Interrex were not isolationists. They actively coexisted with other species, like the alien Kinbrag. Having fought against the forces of chaos for generations, they were deeply suspicious of the militaristic Imperium. When Horus landed on their world of Zenobia for diplomatic talks, the meeting was tense. The situation collapsed when a priceless artifact, a ceremonial Kinbrag blade known as the Anatheme, was stolen from a museum. The thief was Erebus, a chaplain of the Word-Bearers, who was secretly a servant of the Dark Gods. The theft was part of a larger scheme orchestrated by his Primarch, Lorgar. The incident was blamed on the Imperium, negotiations broke down into violence, and a full-scale war erupted that ended with the complete annihilation of the Interrex. The next stage of the plan unfolded on the feral world of Davin. During a campaign to put down a rebellion by the local populace, Horus was struck down and grievously wounded. The weapon that felled him was the Anatheme, now in the hands of the planet's governor, Eugen Temba, who himself had been corrupted by chaos and armed by Erebus. As Horus lay dying, Erebus suggested he be taken to the Serpent Lodge, a local warrior cult, for healing. It was a trap. Inside their temple, the cultists performed a dark ritual, allowing Erebus to enter the War Master's mind. There, he fed Horus a series of powerful visions, a future where the Emperor was worshipped as a god, while the Primarchs were forgotten relics. A revelation that the Emperor had used the powers of the warp to create his sons, making them no different from the creatures he claimed to despise. These visions twisted Horus's existing anger and resentment into pure hatred. The Chaos Gods then made their offer: deliver the Emperor to them, and the galaxy would be his. As Horus teetered on the edge, Magnus the Red, defying the Edict of Nicaea, projected his consciousness into his brother's mind. He desperately tried to warn Horus, pleading with him to see through Erebus's lies and trust in their father. But it was no use. The poison had taken root. Horus, now convinced his father was a hypocritical tyrant bent on achieving godhood, made his choice. He awoke from his fever dream completely healed and utterly changed. His first act was to seek out allies for the coming war. Angron with his simmering rage, Mortarion with his hatred of tyrants, and Fulgrim, already corrupted by a demonic blade, were the first to join his cause. They were soon followed by the resentful Perturabo, the fatalistic Conrad Cursor, and the enigmatic Alfarius Omegon. Lorgar, the original architect of the betrayal, pledged his legion as well. The rebellion was further bolstered when the Fabricator General of Mars swore allegiance to the War Master, bringing half of the Mechanicum, now the Dark Mechanicum, along with vast segments of the Imperial Army and Navy, into the traitor camp. For a time, the conspiracy remained a secret. Only Magnus knew the full, awful truth. Breaking his father's ultimate command, he decided he had to use his forbidden sorcery to warn Terra. He performed a massive ritual, sending his astral form hurtling across the galaxy. As he neared the throne world, he slammed into an impenetrable psychic barrier. Desperate to deliver his message, Magnus poured all his power into a final, catastrophic push, shattering the shield and his own spirit in the process. He did not know that this shield was protecting the Emperor's secret webway project, an attempt to create a safe path for humanity through the stars, free from the dangers of the warp. By breaking it, Magnus had just given its greatest enemies a direct route to the heart of the throne world. The Emperor's rage was a cold and terrible thing. Magnus the Red, in his desperate attempt to warn of Horus's betrayal, had used forbidden sorcery to breach the psychic defenses of the Imperial Palace. In doing so, he had not only defied the Edict of Nicaea, but had also shattered his father's secret webway project, unleashing demonic entities beneath the throne world. The Emperor's judgment was swift and absolute. An order of condemnation was issued. Magnus was to be arrested and brought to Terra to answer for his crimes. To carry out this sentence, the Emperor called upon Leman Russ, the feral Primarch of the Space Wolves, authorizing him to use any means necessary to secure his brother. In a move that would have devastating consequences, the Emperor also informed his War Master of the situation, tasking Horus with assembling a compliance force and seeking his counsel. The force designated for the mission was immense, led by the Captain General of the Custodes, Constantine Valdor, and included elite Terran auxiliaries, the Anti-Psyker Sisterhood of Silence, and the terrifying god machines of the Ordo Sinister Titan cohort. Meanwhile, Leman Russ was concluding a campaign against a Xenos empire. Upon receiving the order, he launched a furious final assault, wiped out the enemy, and immediately set course for his homeworld of Fenris to rearm and gather his legion. Whether his haste was driven by pure loyalty or a simmering hatred for his sorceress brother is a matter of debate. It was during this time that Horus played his hand. Knowing Russ's deep-seated prejudice against Psykers, he dispatched a delegation from his own legion, the Sons of Horus, to intercept the Wolf King. The exact words exchanged are not recorded, but the outcome was clear. Horus twisted the Emperor's command, convincing Russ that arresting Magnus was no longer sufficient. The Crimson King was too dangerous to be left alive. Extermination was the only answer. To aid in this unsanctioned escalation, Horus provided Russ with 5,000 of his own legionaries and 12 Titans, framing it as a gesture of support for a difficult task. When Russ's fleet, now numbering 50,000 Space Wolves, rendezvoused with the force from Terra, the tension between the commanders was immediate. Valdor was a being of pure duty, intent on following the Emperor's order to the letter: arrest Magnus. Russ, now convinced of his brother's irredeemable corruption, argued for a killing blow. In the end, Valdor reluctantly deferred to the Primarch's command, but the disagreement lingered between them as they set a course for Prospero, Magnus's home world. As the punitive fleet entered the Prospero system, they found it eerily silent. The Thousand Suns orbital stations and listening posts were abandoned. Magnus had foreseen their arrival, yet he had not prepared his legion for war. Instead, he had scattered his fleet and recalled his sons to Tisca, the planet's magnificent capital city, while severing all communication with the wider Imperium. When the Imperial fleet established orbit, Russ offered his brother a chance to surrender. The planet remained silent. Taking this as the ultimate insult and ignoring Valdor's pleas for patience, Russ ordered a full orbital bombardment. Prospero burned. For an hour, Lance batteries and cyclonic torpedoes scoured the surface, turning a paradise world into a plain of glass and ash. Only Tisca survived, protected by a shimmering kind shield of immense psychic power, the final, undeniable proof that Magnus had defied the Emperor's will. The ground assault began with the Space Wolves. Leman Russ vowed his legion would be the first to set foot on the planet, and he kept his word. Descending in drop pods, the wolves slammed into the outskirts of Tisca. The Wolf King himself was the first to emerge, his wild roar the signal for the attack. They were met not by Space Marines, but by the disciplined mortal soldiers of the Prosperine Spire Guard. Though they fought bravely, they were no match for the Emperor's executioners. As the wolves pushed deeper, they still saw no sign of the Thousand Suns. To provoke a response, they toppled a colossal statue of Magnus. The provocation worked. As the wolves entered the city proper, bolter fire and arcs of raw power erupted from the Thousand Suns, who had finally entered the fray. Magnus's legionaries unleashed their psychic might, halting the wolves' charge and inflicting grievous casualties. Seeing his momentum falter, Russ was forced to call in his reserves. The battle for Tisca descended into a brutal, grinding war of attrition. Witnessing the struggle, Constantine Valdor finally committed his own forces. The Golden Custodes and the Silent Sisters of Silence joined the attack, their primary objective being the Great Pyramids at the city's heart. The Sisters proved to be the decisive weapon. Their null aura crippled the Thousand Suns' psychic abilities, allowing the Loyalists to finally break their lines. The battle became a supernatural inferno. A warp storm coalesced in the sky above Tisca. The latent genetic curses of both legions began to manifest. Thousand Suns warriors warped and mutated as the flesh change took hold, while Space Wolves devolved into the monstrous Wolfen. Amidst the chaos, Magnus the Red finally took the field, and the two brother Primarchs clashed. While they dueled, Valdor's forces cornered the last of the Thousand Suns and thousands of civilians in the Central Pyramid. His order was simple: kill them all. At that moment, Russ gained the upper hand, hoisting Magnus into the air and breaking his back over his knee. But as he raised his frost blade for the killing blow, reality tore apart. A blinding light and a vortex of sorcerous energy consumed the pyramid. As demons manifested on the battlefield, the structure, along with Magnus and his surviving sons, vanished. In his final moment of defeat, Magnus had offered his soul to Tzeentch, the chaos god of change, and was spirited away into the warp. The battle for Prospero was over. The Loyalists had won, but the cost was staggering. An entire legion of Space Marines was lost to the Imperium, reborn as a powerful new enemy. For the first time, brother had fought brother in open, total war. Leman Russ was left a broken man, his objective unfulfilled, and his hands stained with the blood of his kin. The formal congratulations he later received from the War Master Horus were nothing but ash in his mouth. The seed of betrayal first took root on a world that had already been brought to heel once before. Istvan III, a technologically advanced human culture in the Ultima Segmentum, had initially resisted integration into the Imperium. Their fierce independence and adherence to a local faith, incompatible with the imperial truth, forced a military solution. The Raven Guard, under their Primarch Corvus Corax, executed a swift and decisive compliance action, securing the planet in a single night. A new governor, the former Imperial Army Major Vardus Pral, was installed, and the world's defenses were rebuilt to Imperial standards. For 6 years, Istvan III seemed pacified, but communications with the sector grew unreliable. Faint reports spoke of unrest and the rise of a fanatical cult known as the War Singer. The truth was finally revealed when a garbled astropathic message reached a Death Guard cruiser. reporting widespread slaughter. Governor Pral had betrayed his oaths, embraced heresy, and now led the War Singer cult in open rebellion. This was an affront that could not be tolerated. The duty of crushing this insurrection fell to the War Master himself. Publicly, Horus promised to make Istvan III a brutal object lesson in the price of treason. Privately, he saw it as the perfect stage on which to begin his own far greater treachery against the Emperor. The rebellion on Istvan III was a gift to Horus, providing the ideal pretext to gather specific legions without arousing suspicion. He summoned the forces of Primarchs, who had already been swayed to his cause. Angron's World Eaters, Mortarian's Death Guard, and Fulgrim's Emperor's Children. These legions, he declared, would be the hammer that would smash the Istvanian heretics. At the same time, he began his strategic purge of loyalists from the main theater of operations. The Ultramarines, the Blood Angels, and the Dark Angels, three of the most powerful and steadfast legions, were dispatched on urgent, fabricated missions to the distant edges of the galaxy, ensuring they would be too far away to interfere with his true plans. The assault on Istvan III proved to be more difficult than anticipated. The traitor Governor Pral had amassed an army of fanatics, but their true strength lay with the War Singer Psykers. These sorcerers possessed a strange and potent sonic power. Their coordinated shrieks were a physical force capable of buckling Astarte's power armor and inducing crippling madness. The battlefield was a chaotic scene of disciplined space marines being swarmed by waves of cultists who charged with nothing but their bare hands, their minds whipped into a frenzy by the War Singer's cries. Despite the resistance, the traitor legion's experience was overwhelming. The Emperor's Children executed a flawless drop assault on the Governor's palace, and after a bloody fight through its grand halls, the renowned duelist Lucius cornered and killed Vardis Pral. Simultaneously, contingent of the Sons of Horus, led by the respected Captain Garviel Loken, stormed the cult's primary temple fortress, eradicating the War Singers at their source. Within hours, the organized resistance on Istvan III was broken. The Astartes of the Four Legions stood victorious, believing the campaign to be a swift and unqualified success. They began the process of securing key locations and consolidating their positions, their celebrations marked by the grim satisfaction of a job well done. They had no idea that the planet-side battle was merely a prelude, a way to deploy loyalist elements of their own legions to the surface. The real enemy was not among the dead cultists, but was in orbit above them, and the true battle for Istvan III was about to begin. With the drop site massacre concluded, Horus began the next phase of his grand rebellion, the March on Terra. However, the War Master was a brilliant strategist, and he knew that a direct assault was impossible as long as one major obstacle remained. Robuti Gilliman's domain of Ultramar, a vast and self-sufficient region often called the Empire within an empire, possessed the military and logistical strength to single-handedly halt his advance and crush the rebellion. Ultramar had to be neutralized, or better yet, burned to the ground. Horus had laid the groundwork for this long before the Istvan system atrocities, dispatching Gilliman and his Ultramarines on a campaign to the far-flung Viridian sector, ensuring the Imperium's most capable legion would be out of position when the war began. The task of bringing ruin to the 500 worlds of Ultramar was given to two Primarchs perfectly suited for the dark work ahead: Lorgar of the Word-Bearers and Angron of the World Eaters. For Lorgar, this was a deeply personal mission of vengeance. He had never forgiven Gilliman for the humiliation his legion had suffered on the world of Monarchia, where the Ultramarines had been the instrument of the Emperor's censure. Angron, by contrast, was driven by nothing more than a psychotic and insatiable lust for slaughter, making him the ideal weapon for a campaign of pure terror. The combined might of their two fleets formed the core of the Shadow Crusade, an unstoppable armada aimed at the heart of their brother's empire. The Shadow Crusade's path was marked by a trail of dead worlds. Shielded by the roiling warp storms that now blinded the galaxy, the traitor fleets moved without detection. Planet after planet in the border regions of Ultramar was systematically annihilated, their populations butchered by World Eater's berserkers and the demon-infused Gal Vorbak of the Word-Bearers. Distress calls never escaped the static of the warp. To outside observers, it was senseless carnage, but to Lorgar, it was a grand ritual. Every death, every city burned, was a blood sacrifice offered to the dark gods, a prayer of violence designed to fuel a far greater and more terrible purpose. Their first major strategic target was the fortress world of Armatura, a bastion of imperial power and the primary gatekeeper to Ultramar. Beyond it lay the Ruin Storm, a permanent and chaotic warp anomaly that made travel impossible. Armatura's legendary defenses were crushed by the overwhelming force of the combined fleets and a brutal planetary assault. The battle was so devastating that the world would fail to fully recover even 10,000 years later. With Armatura's fall, Lorgar's plan entered its next phase. Empowered by the mass sacrifices, the Word-Bearer's Dark Apostle, Erebus, performed rituals that allowed the traitor Armada to do the impossible. Navigate the chaotic tides of the Ruin Storm, using it as a protected corridor to bypass all remaining defenses and emerge deep within Ultramar's core systems. Once inside Guilliman's domain, the Primarchs divided their forces to inflict maximum damage. Lorgar and Angron led the main assault against Nuceria, the military and industrial heart of the Ultramarines' power base. Meanwhile, Lorgar's most trusted lieutenants, Cor Pharaon and Erebus, were dispatched to the vital forge world of Calth, while a smaller fleet was sent to blockade the capital world of Macragge. To complete the strategy of chaos, small independent kill squads of World Eaters were unleashed across the entire region with a single, simple order: kill everything in their path. The 500 worlds were about to be drowned in blood. The assault on Calth was a masterpiece of deception, as a direct naval engagement against the fortified shipyards of the Ultramarines would have been suicidal. The key to the plan was a mobile orbital docking station, the Campanile. Before the Word-Bearer's fleet even arrived in the system, the station had fallen silent, its crew mysteriously slaughtered. The culprits were never identified, but the station was secured by the Word-Bearers upon their arrival, primed to become the instrument of their betrayal. This treachery was possible because Calth, and indeed all of Ultramar, was completely blind. The growing warp storms had severed interstellar communication, leaving them ignorant of Horus's rebellion and the carnage already unfolding on their border worlds. So, when the Word-Bearer's fleet translated into the Calth system, they were welcomed as brothers. A delegation of traitors was even ferried to an Ultramarines cruiser for formal greetings. It was at that moment that Lorgar's trap was sprung. Using powerful sorcery, the Word-Bearers sent the Campanile hurtling toward the planet's primary orbital dock at near light speed. The impact was apocalyptic. The station plowed through hundreds of warships, from nimble scout vessels to ancient battle barges, detonating in a cataclysm of fire and shrapnel. Ships not vaporized outright were sent tumbling into deep space, their crews blinded by the flash. The mighty Ultramarines battle barge Therion lost control and fell from orbit, crashing into Calth's capital city and destroying the primary Mechanicum communications hub. In a single, devastating blow, millions were killed. Aboard his flagship, Roboute Guilliman arrived in system to witness the aftermath of the catastrophe. Even as he watched his fleet burn, he clung to the hope that it was all a tragic accident. The very concept of Astartes turning on Astartes was unthinkable to his logical mind. He hailed the word-bearer's fleet, but his calls were met with a storm of weapons fire. As his own ships were torn apart, Guilliman desperately tried to reach Lorgar. When a connection was finally established, his pleas for a ceasefire were answered only with vile curses. It was only then that the Primarch of the 13th Legion accepted the horrifying truth. With a heavy heart, he gave the order to return fire. Lorgar contacted him again a short time later, not for negotiation, but to gloat. He revealed the full scope of the rebellion, informing Guilliman that the War Master had turned against their father and that loyalist Primarchs had already been slain. At that moment, a grotesque creature materialized on the bridge of Guilliman's flagship and exploded, breaching the command deck. Guilliman and several of his honor guard were vented into the void, while unseen horrors, demons of chaos, began to manifest throughout the ship. 10 hours later, just as the defenders' morale was about to break, their Primarch returned. Having miraculously survived a full 10 hours exposed to the vacuum of space without a helmet, Guilliman reappeared on his bridge, radiating a cold, focused fury. His return electrified his men, who rallied to push back the demonic invaders. On the planet below, the situation was just as dire. The initial betrayal had cost the lives of nearly 100,000 Ultramarines, but the survivors were beginning to organize a coherent resistance. In a desperate counterattack, Loyalist forces managed to retake control of Calth's planetary defense grid. They turned the massive weapons on the Word-Bearer's fleet, tearing through their ships and forcing the traitor commander, Cor Ferron, to order a withdrawal. With a semblance of control re-established, Guilliman began to receive the true, horrifying scope of the situation. The Word-Bearers had fired esoteric weapons at Calth's sun, destabilizing it and bathing the planet in lethal radiation. Worse, distress calls were now flooding in from across the 500 worlds. Calth was not the only world under attack. Finally, reports confirmed that immense warp storms were closing in, threatening to trap his entire remaining fleet in the Calth system for decades, or even centuries. Forced to make an impossible choice, Guilliman gave the order to evacuate. He instructed the forces remaining on the surface to retreat into the planet's vast network of subterranean arcologies and continue the fight, a brutal underground war that would last for 10 long years. As his fleet prepared to depart the ravaged system, the Primarch made a solemn vow. He would return, and he would rebuild. On Terra, the news of the War Master's betrayal was met with a storm of disbelief and fury. The Emperor, however, remained secluded, deep within the Imperial Palace, consumed by a project of such importance that he had forbidden any and all disturbances. In his absence, the immense burden of command fell upon two figures: the stoic Primarch Rogul Dorn of the Imperial Fists and the ancient wise Malcador the Sigillite, regent of Terra. Dorn, filled with a cold rage, immediately took control of all loyalist military assets in the solar system, determined to bring his treacherous brother to account. Their immediate problem was immense. Terra was isolated. Vicious warp storms, which Malcador correctly identified as the malevolent work of the Chaos Gods, had enveloped the system, making communication and travel impossible. To break this psychic siege, a terrible price was paid. Thousands of astropaths and sanctioned psychers were sacrificed, their combined mental energies channeled to power a single, desperate pulse from the Astronomicon. The beacon blazed through the storm, and in an instant, Terra was flooded with messages from 1,000 worlds. The news was a tidal wave of horror. Rebellions, civil wars, and traitor incursions were tearing the Imperium apart from within. Rogul Dorn was able to establish contact with 6 Primarchs he still believed to be loyal. He relayed the unthinkable news of Horus's actions and issued a single, clear directive. All loyalist legions were to converge on the Istvan system with their full strength. Dorn intended to meet the traitors in a decisive battle and crush the rebellion before it could spread further. He and his Imperial fists would remain in the solar system to fortify the throne world and deal with a brewing insurrection on Mars. The first Loyalist vessel to reach the designated war zone was a scout ship of the Raven Guard. What its crew witnessed was a scene of utter desolation. The surface of Istvan III was a graveyard, and as they approached Istvan V, their sensors lit up with the energy signatures of a massive military buildup. The traitors were not fleeing. They were digging in, preparing for a confrontation. The first wave of Dorn's retribution force consisted of 3 legions: the Salamanders, the Iron Hands, and the Raven Guard. Leading the vanguard was the fleet of the Iron Hands, their Primarch Ferrus Manus consumed by a white-hot fury. The source of his rage was personal. His own dearest brother, Fulgrim, had attempted to sway him to Horus's cause and was now personally leading his Emperor's children against the Loyalist fleet. Within an hour of their arrival, the 2 forces were locked in a savage engagement on the dark sands of Istvan V. Ferrus Manus led his Iron Hands in a thunderous charge up the center, while the Raven Guard under Corvus Corax struck at the right flank, and Vulcan's Salamanders advanced on the left. The responded immediately. The World Eater, Primarch Angron, led his berserkers in a ferocious countercharge that smashed into the Loyalist lines, isolating the Raven Guard. At the same time, clouds of toxic gas rolled across the left flank, heralding the arrival of Mortarion and his Death Guard. 3 hours into the brutal battle, as the Loyalists were being forced back, 4 new fleets translated into orbit. The long-awaited reinforcements, the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word-Bearers, and Alpha Legion, had arrived. Seeing the new arrivals, Corax urged his brothers to conduct a tactical withdrawal to consolidate their forces. Vulcan agreed, but Ferrus Manus, blinded by his need for vengeance, refused. He ordered his legion to press the attack, seeking a final confrontation with Fulgrim. As the Salamanders and Raven Guard fell back toward the designated landing zones to link up with the newly arrived legions, the trap was sprung. They discovered the truth not through a transmission, but when hundreds of thousands of bolters from the reinforcements opened fire into their retreating backs. Every single one of the second-wave legions had already sworn allegiance to Horus. The Loyalists were caught in a perfect kill zone. 3 battered legions were now surrounded by 8 traitor legions. All hope of victory vanished, replaced by the certainty of annihilation. In the ensuing slaughter, 200,000 Loyalist Space Marines and countless more Imperial Army soldiers were butchered. The final tragic act of the massacre was the death of a Primarch. Ferrus Manus and the last remnants of his legion were caught in the heart of the storm. He fought his way through the maelstrom until he stood alone, locked in a duel with the brother he once loved. In the end, the preternaturally swift Fulgrim landed the fatal blow, his demon-forged blade taking his brother's head from his shoulders. Thus ended the life of the Gorgon, the first of the Emperor's sons to be slain by a traitor's hand. Horus understood a fundamental truth of galactic warfare. Terror could not be conquered without first breaking the industrial might of Mars. Even before his betrayal was known to the Imperium, the War Master was laying the groundwork for a civil war within the Mechanicum itself. His target was the Fabricator General, Kelbor Hal, a man who represented a powerful and resentful faction within the Martian priesthood. These tech priests had long chafed under the Emperor's authority, viewing his restrictions on research into artificial intelligence and warp-based technologies not as safeguards, but as shackles on their quest for knowledge. They also rejected the imperial doctrine that the Emperor was the living incarnation of their machine god, the Omnissiah. The War Master's offer was everything Kelbor Hal's faction craved. He promised a future of Martian independence, free from the oversight of Terra, where no field of study would be forbidden. To seal the pact, Horus provided gifts of immense value: schematics from long-lost standard template constructs, and, most importantly, the access codes to the vaults of Moravec. This was a place of legend and fear on Mars, a sealed repository deep beneath the planet's surface, containing technologies and data so dangerous that the Emperor himself had decreed it should remain locked for eternity. For Kelbor Hal, this was an irresistible temptation. Inside the vault, amongst countless other forbidden artifacts, his followers discovered the scrap code. It was a demonic technovirus, a plague of pure chaos that could infect any machine, corrupting its machine spirit and twisting its logic to serve the dark gods. The scrap code was the perfect weapon to unleash on a world that was, itself, a single planet-spanning machine. Within hours of its release, the virus spread like wildfire through the Martian datanet. The planet's great archives were wiped clean, factories malfunctioned in catastrophic explosions, and automated systems turned on their masters. By the next morning, Mars was dark, cut off from Terra, and 1 million of its citizens were dead. Not all of Mars fell to the initial digital attack. Some forges and enclaves, sensing the corruption, managed to sever their connections in time, becoming isolated islands of loyalty in a sea of madness. Kelbor Hal now needed a pretext to move from covert sabotage to open warfare. He found it in the figure of Coriel Zeth, the brilliant mistress of the Magma City. Zeth publicly renounced the dogmas of the Mechanicum cult, but declared her unwavering loyalty to the Emperor of Mankind. Seizing the opportunity, Kelbor Hal branded her and her followers as heretics, officially declaring a holy war that engulfed the entire planet. The Schism of Mars was a conflict of unimaginable scale. Legions of Skitarii, cohorts of battle automata, knightly households, and the colossal god machines of the Titan legions were all thrown into the fray. The primary stronghold for the IAB loyalists became the Magma City, a vast forge complex built into the caldera of a dormant volcano. Near its walls, one of the war's most titanic clashes took place as the traitor titans of Legio Mortis engaged the loyal war engines of Legio Tempestus. When news of the Martian Civil War reached Terra, Malkador the Sigillite implored Rogaldorn to intervene. A relief force of Imperial fists, led by the formidable First Captain Sigismund, was dispatched with a clear objective: secure the vital armories of Mondus Oculum and Mondus Gamma, and, if possible, support a loyalist counterattack. What Sigismund's forces encountered was a technological nightmare. Kelbor Hal's followers, now calling themselves the Dark Mechanicum, had begun fusing demonic entities with machinery, creating horrific engines of war that defied all sane principles of engineering. After suffering heavy losses against these abominations, Sigismund was forced to order a retreat, having salvaged only a fraction of the weapons and supplies they had come for. Back at Magma City, the end was near. The Loyalists' most powerful titan, the Dies Irae, was brought down, and the entire knightly order of House Tyrannis was wiped out. As the traitor forces breached the final defenses, Coriel Zeth made her final choice. She would not allow her city and its knowledge to fall into the hands of heretics. Magma City was named for the rivers of lava that flowed through its aqueduct system, carefully controlled by ancient safety protocols. In her final act of defiance, Zeth disengaged them all. Molten rock flooded the city's streets and halls, incinerating everything and everyone within. When the fires died down, nothing was left of Magma City but a smoking ruin. Mars was lost to the Imperium, its surface a fractured battlefield, its soul given over to the dark machinations of chaos. As Horus's armada burned its way toward the throne world, Terra found itself dangerously isolated. Of the Loyalist legions, only the Blood Angels were able to answer the call to defend the cradle of humanity in time. The Space Wolves were still reeling from their Pyrrhic victory on Prospero. The Ultramarines were trapped in their own empire, fighting a desperate war against the Word-bearers. The Salamanders, Raven Guard, and Iron Hands were shattered remnants of their former glory, still recovering from the Istvan Fifth Massacre. The Dark Angels were dealing with their own internal strife, while Jagatai Khan and his White Scars were locked in a running battle with the Alpha Legion, fighting to break through to the solar system. The Defenders of Terra were a grim but determined coalition. Two understrength Astartes legions, the Imperial Fists and the Blood Angels, stood beside their Primarchs, Rogaldorn and Sanguinius. They were supported by loyalist Titan legions, the remnants of the Martian Mechanicum that had escaped the schism, and a vast but ultimately fragile line of 2 billion Imperial army soldiers. Against them stood a force of unimaginable power. Horus had not come alone. The Chaos Gods had unleashed their own demonic legions, and the traitor Primarchs and their warriors were now bloated with foul energies. The Death Guard had become unstoppable plague marines. The Emperor's children had devolved into decadent noise marines. The Thousand Suns wielded sorcery of terrifying new magnitudes, and the World Eaters were consumed by a boundless, corn-fueled rage. This unholy host was bolstered by the full might of the Dark Mechanicum and legions of traitorous Imperial soldiers. Horus held a crushing numerical advantage, but he knew time was not on his side. Every moment the siege dragged on was a moment closer to the arrival of loyalist reinforcements. The journey to Terra had already taken a month, a testament to the heroic but doomed defense mounted by the Imperial Navy. As the traitor fleet finally blockaded the throne world, the orbital bombardment began. In that moment, a flicker of hope arrived. Slashing their way through the closing net, the fleet of the White Scars emerged from a warp rift, their mastery of high-speed void warfare allowing them to reach Terra against all odds. The primary focus of the entire war was the Imperial Palace, a continent-spanning fortress that was humanity's last bastion. The traitor sorcerers tore open reality, summoning vast armies of demons to the field. Before the main assault began, a monstrous figure approached the Eternity Gate. It was Angron, but he had been transfigured. Having fully surrendered to his rage, he had been elevated to demonhood, a towering red-skinned prince of Khorne. He offered the defenders a chance to surrender, but his offer was met by the silent, defiant figure of Sanguinius. The two brothers, one an angel, one a demon, stared each other down, and Angron withdrew to prepare the attack. The greatest battle in human history had begun. Thrice the traitor legions assaulted the palace walls, and thrice they were repulsed by the Blood Angels, but the sheer weight of numbers was relentless, and the traitors slowly gained ground. Frustrated by the slow pace, Horus ordered his Titans to level the walls. The defenders were pushed back toward the Eternity Gate, the final entryway to the palace's inner sanctum. It was there that Sanguinius was challenged by the greater demon Kabanda, the same creature he had defeated once before. In a brutal duel, the wounded Primarch found the strength to defeat the monster again, breaking its back over his knee and banishing it to the warp. The siege raged for 55 days. The Loyalists were on the verge of collapse. As Horus prepared to teleport to the surface to lead the final charge, he received word that Loyalist fleets were on the verge of entering the system. In a desperate gamble to end the war before they arrived, Horus lowered the void shields on his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, a direct, personal challenge to his father. The Emperor, however, was fighting his own secret war deep beneath the palace, holding back a demonic tide that poured from the shattered Webway Gate. Yet he heard his son's challenge. In a moment of supreme sacrifice, Malkador the Sigillite took the Emperor's place upon the Golden Throne, his ancient mind holding the demonic portal shut while his master went to face the War Master. The Emperor teleported to the Vengeful Spirit with Sanguinius, Rogaldorn, and an elite retinue. Horus, empowered by chaos, scattered them throughout his corrupted vessel. The first to find the War Master was Sanguinius. Horus offered his brother one last chance to join him. When Sanguinius refused, the two fought a battle of mythic proportions. But the angel, already weary and wounded, was no match for a being who channeled the power of all four chaos gods. With his last ounce of strength, Sanguinius struck a small dent in Horus's armor before the War Master brutally murdered him. It is said that Sanguinius, gifted with foresight, knew his death was inevitable and went to it willingly. As the angel died, a psychic shockwave of grief and rage washed over his entire legion. In that instant, every blood angel on the planet was consumed by a berserk fury. They abandoned their defensive positions and charged headlong into the traitor ranks in a suicidal, all-consuming assault. This unexpected, ferocious attack bought the defenders precious time, setting the stage for the final confrontation that would decide the fate of humanity. As Horus let the limp body of the great angel fall to the deck, the Emperor arrived. The sight that met him was one of ultimate despair. One beloved son lay dead at the feet of another, who had become a monstrous vessel for the very powers they had fought to contain. The Emperor could only manage a single, quiet question filled with an eternity of pain. "Why?" Horus responded with a madman's laughter. He boasted that he now understood the truth of the Primarch's creation, the hypocritical source of the Emperor's own power. He called his father a tyrant and a coward, while he, Horus, had embraced the true gods of the galaxy and was ascending to a power equal to his creators. The Emperor could only shake his head in sorrow. He knew what Horus could not see. No mortal could ever command the forces of chaos. The War Master was not a master, but a slave, a puppet dancing on the strings of the warp. The accusation enraged Horus, and he unleashed a torrent of psychic lightning, igniting the final duel. Father and son clashed in a storm of physical and mental blows. Yet, for all his immense power, the Emperor was losing. He could not bring himself to use his full strength against the man who had been his first son, his most trusted general, his closest companion. Horus, by contrast, was at the peak of his might, his every attack fueled by a bottomless well of hatred and the combined power of the four chaos gods. Horus deflected every psychic assault and landed devastating blows in return. He seized his father, smashing a psychic fist into his face that vaporized his hair and burst one of his eyes. As the Emperor staggered, Horus lifted him high, tearing an arm from its socket before breaking his spine over his knee. In that moment of agony, the Emperor felt a sensation he had not known for millennia: fear. Then Horus paused. The Emperor, through his one good eye, saw a lone figure step onto the bridge. Imperial accounts differ on who this individual was. Some say a terminator of the Imperial fists, others a custodian guard. But the most enduring tale speaks of a simple Imperial army guardsman named Olanius Pius. Whoever he was, this lone hero charged the arch-traitor. Horus didn't even move. A contemptuous glance was all it took to utterly annihilate the man, erasing him from existence. The hero's selfless, futile sacrifice struck the Emperor with the force of a revelation. He finally understood what had been holding him back. He had been clinging to the memory of the son he had loved, unable to accept the monster that son had become. In that instant, he let go of all hope of redemption. He abandoned his son to his fate. Seizing the brief moment of Horus's distraction, the Emperor gathered the last of his strength and focused it into a single, overwhelming psychic projection. He formed a spear of pure, white-hot energy and drove it through the small crack in Horus's armor, the mark left by Sanguinius's final act of defiance. The blow was absolute, scouring not just Horus's body, but his very soul. As the raw power of the Emperor burned through him, the Chaos Gods, their prized champion now broken, abandoned him. In that moment of clarity, stripped of their corrupting influence, Horus saw the truth of what he had done. The weight of his betrayal, the galaxy he had set ablaze, came crashing down upon him. Racked with an agony beyond physical pain, he looked at his father. "I was a fool," he whispered, his voice finally his own again. "I have betrayed you. All is ruined. Father, kill me now. End my pain." And with a final act of sorrowful duty, the Emperor complied. He unleashed the full, untempered power of his mind, and Horus was gone. Not just his body, but his soul was obliterated from existence, leaving no trace behind, ensuring that the Chaos gods could never again claim him. As Horus was erased from existence, a psychic shockwave tore through the warp. On the battlefield below, the demonic hordes shrieked and dissolved into nothingness. The traitor Primarchs, suddenly severed from the psychic presence of their leader, felt a cold, directionless confusion. The will that had driven their rebellion was gone. Leaderless and without purpose, their armies began to break, the fight draining out of them as they began a disorganized retreat from the throne world. Aboard the vengeful spirit, Rogel Dorn finally fought his way to the bridge and found the Emperor's broken form. The sight was one of utter horror. With his dying breaths, the Emperor whispered his final command. He had to be taken to the Golden Throne. The surviving loyalists teleported back to the Sanctum Imperialis, where Jagatai Khan and a fading Malkador, the Sigillite, waited. Khan's relief at seeing Dorn turned to despair as he saw the Emperor's mangled body and realized Sanguinius was not with them. As they carried their father to the throne, Malkador's ancient body, having held the demonic gate shut with the last of his immense power, crumbled to dust. The Emperor was interred in his place, the arcane machinery of the Golden Throne connecting to what remained of his physical form. This connection briefly roused the Emperor from the brink of death. "Poor, brave Malkador," he psionically communicated to his sons. "My wounds are grievous. I will never again walk among you. Now I am bound to this machine for all time. Dorn Jagatai, your work is not done. The serpent's head is severed, but its body still thrashes. You and your faithful brothers must hunt it down. Now go. You have my orders. Be faithful. Be strong. Be vigilant." With those final words, the Emperor of Mankind fell silent forever. His mind, now a silent sentinel, a psychic lighthouse trapped between his dying body and the roiling madness of the warp. In the aftermath, the Imperium was irrevocably changed. Primarchs like Lemonruss and Jagatai Khan embarked on vengeful crusades, hunting the fleeing traitors into the Eye of Terror. The Dark Angels discovered betrayal within their own ranks, a schism that led to the destruction of their homeworld and the creation of the Fallen. Roboute Guilliman, faced with the monumental task of rebuilding, authored the Codex Astartes. This new doctrine mandated the breakup of the old Space Marine legions into smaller, self-contained chapters of 1,000 warriors, a measure designed to ensure that if a single unit ever fell to chaos, the threat could be contained. This restructuring was not universally accepted, but over time, most loyalist forces adapted. The age of the Primarchs drew to a close as, one by one, they disappeared from the galaxy. Some lost on great quests, others, like Guilliman himself, laid low by grievous wounds and placed in stasis. Governance of the shattered Imperium fell to the High Lords of Terror, the council the Emperor had established before the heresy. In the darkness and fear that followed, the secular imperial truth was slowly replaced by a new, fervent faith, the worship of the God Emperor of mankind. 10,000 years later, by the 41st millennium, this faith has become the monolithic, state-enforced religion of a decaying empire. The Imperium is now a vast, cruel, and bureaucratic machine, mired in dogma and superstition, where the lives of its trillions of citizens are utterly expendable. The very future that Horus had claimed to be fighting against, an empire ruled by priests where his father was worshipped as a god, had come to pass. The Emperor's greatest fear was realized. To the countless generations who have never known him, he is no longer a man, but a deity on a golden throne.